Hey, Sean.
Morning, Mark.
All right, Joe. Seems like the trickle of people is abated. Hey, everyone, welcome back. Happy Thanksgiving to those of you in the US. Sorry, I still have noise next door. Quick updates. The Provenance 1.0 pull request, I haven't, there's a bunch of outstanding comments. I just haven't had time to address them. I'm hoping to get to that this week or next. The spec 1.0, as promised, I sent out for review last week. It's in a very draft state with a bunch of to-dos. Joshua already commented on it, suggesting that we merge it and then iterate on it in subsequent pull requests. It would be good. I'm happy to do that. I just, always like to leave comment periods open because I feel like once something is submitted, it's kind of a larger barrier to comment on. And so I just want to make sure there's enough period that people can comment. But if everyone here is okay with that, then I'll just do that. And probably the Provenance one, well, the Provenance 1.0, I think needs a little bit more work. There's also, I think, a question of like, when do we unhide the spec? Because right now I have like the thing, it's hidden so it doesn't show up in the drop-down list. Like you have to literally type in the URL bar. At some point, we should do that so people could discover it. I don't know what the bar should be for that. Right now, I still think it's kind of like we still have some old text. It's not coherent, but eventually we should do that soon. Yeah, and the other topic is within the 536. One of the, here I can present. How do I present? Every time I miss it. There's a preview. One of the main thing, this is an update from last week. The main idea is that break it down between the software producer, the build system, the packaging ecosystem, and the consumer have some set of responsibilities. I brought back the checkboxes. I kind of basically did a hybrid of what we discussed last time, where it shows that the requirement and there's still degrees, but the checkboxes do kind of convey the message nicely. And there's some notion that like we need a better term for this, like the ecosystem does stuff because each individual consumer ideally, this is incomplete, by the way, Joshua already had some comment on this, that the ecosystem takes care of stuff or infrastructure or something. So like within open source, something like NPM or PyPI or Maven maybe takes care of things of like, there's a convention for how you distribute provenance. There's just convention for how you set what expectations of what the provenance ought to look like. There's maybe tooling to automatically verify it. So every time you do an install or an upgrade, it just happens for you. I don't think we want to have every individual consumer implement their own or run their own thing. And so shifting it to infrastructure, I think is what we kind of want to suggest, not that it's required, but suggested. And so framing it in this way, we've already had feedback changing package instead of packaging, but other than that little nitpick, one other term I posted today was maybe distribution ecosystem or something like that, but because I'm afraid that package ecosystem implies too much like it has to be PyPI, say. Whereas in reality, I think it's more of like some sort of convention infrastructure that happens automatically. Joshua?
Yeah, I think every term is going to suffer similar issues. Like distribution is a term in PyPI. That's what they call their packages. But also Linux distributions are a thing, so that's super overloaded as well. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have any. I only have kind of negative observations. I don't have any suggestions at this point. But I'm struggling with this one a lot. I think package ecosystem maybe. Well, it's the best one we've had so far, I think. On the as a bit of a follow-up, I started trying to write something and create a diagram for the kind of ecosystem that you described with kind of build artifacts and provenance going in and like declaring expectations and things. So I can maybe show the diagram as the next discussion.
Yeah, sure.
Just so this is what I have so far. It's just started playing around with trying to indicate this piece of the SLSA. I nearly said expectations, but that's a term on the diagram, so that's trips myself up. This whole notion anyway of how we've got a lot of text and diagrams about the build model and how you produce provenance, but we don't have much yet in the way of descriptions about how this fits into the larger ecosystem of distributing the provenance and then having some expectations about the provenance content and how you evaluate that to make a decision at kind of use time. So I started playing around with some words and pictures for that last week, and this is the picture I've got so far.
Yeah, I wonder if, so the direction of the arrows is always difficult because I guess you're using them then to be like the direction of the action as opposed to the information flow.
Yeah.
Because at the top, they're the same direction, but at the bottom, they're opposite directions. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's
I tried it both ways, and I've even got different arrowheads in places because this was I hadn't intended to show this today because this was very much like playing around with it last thing on Friday and then haven't looked at it again today. So yeah, not particularly coherent.
But yeah, something that I think shows like the three pieces. I don't even know if I would do the box around the three as expectations, but rather just have three boxes. There's expectations, provenance, and artifacts, and just so you kind of effectively compare all three, right?
Yeah, the reason I have it straddling that line is because in the text I'm writing, I emphasize that some of the expectations can be, or like we should expect there should be implicit expectations by the packaging or package ecosystem, but then a user can set their own expectations. So the ecosystem might define, like we've talked a lot about how there's a canonical kind of source repository and builder for most like projects, and the ecosystem would define that. But your user might still say, yeah, I'm okay with taking SLSA level 3 things from PyPI, but SLSA level 1 things from PyPI, I'm not going to touch. So I wanted to indicate that there's two places where expectations can be set. Sean.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate revisiting looking at DFD's data flow diagrams as a model for this, because they define things about what the direction of arrows mean and where security boundaries are and things like that. I can't remember where the best reference for them is, but I learned about them from Adam Shostak's threat modeling book.
Threat modeling book, yeah. Okay. Might be a Cyber Monday present to myself then. I appreciate the tip though, thanks. Unless anyone else has anything else, I'll just stop sharing this now. Just brought it up because it was relevant to the discussion we were having.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's helpful. So our data flow diagrams, is that like an official notation, or is it just a general idea?
No, I think it's an official notation. And if you look at things like Lucid charts, they have specific sets of iconography for DFDs. So yeah, I'm not sure if there's an official standard anywhere, but certainly, you know, all the ones I've seen seem to follow the same sort of pattern. So yeah, I don't know whether there is an official reference. There probably is somewhere, but yeah, say threat modeling was where I came across them.
Yeah, I think that's valuable. I want to make sure that we, like, the graph or the diagram still makes sense, even if you're unfamiliar with, like, you don't even have to know that that exists, but that way it's a convention. Yeah, but it seems like just looking at like the Wikipedia article, it seems simple enough. But I think that, I assume there's like more of a, it's not just notation, but rather a whole process for how you create one. Process meaning not like a program, but rather like a work, like philosophy.
Yes, yeah, I've certainly found them very useful for modeling. Even just if you want to do a diagram of a kind of a big, you know, a big system, it's useful to think about it in that way, just because it shows you where the data is going.
Yeah, let's definitely consider that. And I think we could also consider other diagrams too, and maybe we should do that for all our diagrams. Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Sean. In terms of the other pull request 536, which I just presented earlier, if you could either comment or just give like a thumbs up or something if you're okay merging it. Or if, obviously if you have comments, like that's even better. That would just be good just to get it. Well, I guess, well, if you do, how about this? I will plan to merge it like tomorrow or Wednesday, unless I hear other comments. And we can always address in future comments. Yeah, Arno?
Yeah, hi. I think, I would suggest to add a status section. I know you have a pop-up that says, hey, this is just a draft, but it's fairly common if you look like in Directory, there's a status section at the beginning of the document that clearly states what you're expecting, what the expectation of the reader should be about the status of the document and whether you're actually inviting comments or not. And I think that would actually, address some of the challenges you seem to be, you don't want to look like you're pushing too hard on this is where we're going, and whether you're actually inviting comments from the broader, community. I think you can address this in a section that's a bit, more verbose than what you have in that little pop-up that says, hey, this is just a draft. But otherwise, I think you should go ahead and merge.
Oh, that's a really good idea. So maybe to flesh it out a little bit more, like each page could have that thing of like status, and maybe it's like a link where like it.
So you can have at the beginning of the document,
yeah,
a status section that clearly states everything you want to say, what people should expect about the status of the document, what it means for the group, and whether you're inviting comments from the broader or not yet. You might say, hey, we're still very much, trying to figure this out. Maybe it's not worth your trouble unless you really want to be part of the group. And then you can indeed have a link to that section from the different pages with your pop-up.
So you think just like have that just on like the top level page, and every sub page just links to it instead of having that blurb copied every time.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah, I'll do that. That sounds really good. Then I'd be less concerned about, well, we still have to like figure out when to like unhide it, of like when is it good enough that we even link to it, but
but I think it does kind of lessen the issue with keeping it hidden. It's like, well, we are clearly stating what this is about. Then as long as the group here is comfortable saying, yeah, we are happy to share where we are, then there's no real issue. I mean, in Directory-C, it's very common to have working groups share publicly. They never hide anything from the get-go. The draft is in GitHub and it's available and it's a living document, but they have this status section that clearly states what to expect. So.
Yeah, and to be clear, hide is maybe not the best word. Like, it's in GitHub, it's there. It's just like,
if you see the pull request, you can get to it. So it's not really hidden, but
yeah, or you just type the URL. It's just like, yeah, I don't want people to land on it that like think, oh, this is the next version and this is like what's going to be published in a week, but rather like this is like a total rough, yeah. But yeah, an explanation thing, and maybe we could use terminology that makes it clear, like different statuses of like draft means like it's totally being edited, it's half written, and then in review or something like that. Yeah, that'll help. ITF. Like, what do you have? Is there a link for what terminology other groups use?
Yeah, Directory-C uses working draft, which makes it very clear that this is something you're actually working on. But you can
W3C, did you say?
Yeah, Directory-C. So you can look at any spec in Directory-C, you'll find this working draft. I mean, you don't want to inherit the whole, specification. The recommendation track of Directory-C is a bit too much. You don't want all of that, but there's like, there's working draft is the key first thing that you can hang on to communicate. This is still work in progress.
I like this suggestion because there's multiple considerations before it's ready for like general feedback, like whether we've hit all of the
Exactly.
features or whether we've made sure we're consistent in terminology or whatever else we need to do before we get that like general feedback. But there's definitely some use in getting more feedback as long as the reader is prepared for what kind of feedback we need at this point. So that's a great suggestion. Thanks.
Yeah, so they use working draft, candidate recommendation, proposed recommendation, and W3C recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, historically, W3C didn't want to call what they produced as standards because they don't want to look like they were infringing on formal de jure standards, organization, ISO, and so on. So they use recommendation. That's Tim Berners-Lee being too humble, in my opinion, but that's how it is. And so, but you can call it whatever you want. My recommendation is to not call it standard. You can stick with specification is a good term because it doesn't carry any kind of, meaning with regard to the formal status. But so you could say working draft and then proposed specification and specification, for instance. It's short enough that you get 3 levels. When you have settled all these issues internally, you feel like, hey, this is good, right? And you just want to give a final period of review, you say proposed specification. And then when it's final, you say specification. You could call it final, but you don't have to.
So I like working draft.
You can, again, you use the status doc. The status section can give you that, opportunity to very clearly explain what you mean by the status of this document. So
yeah, that's good. So maybe 3 things: working draft, proposed specification, specification.
something like this, I think, is good enough now.
Yeah.
You can expand if you really feel later on, but I would say those 3 steps is probably good enough to get us going.
We have something similar in the SLSA proposals repo, which we kind of don't use very much. But it won't fit here. I think what you suggested is good. Thumbs up for me.
I was going to suggest we document this in the proposals repo.
Should we just document it directly on the site?
Yeah, I mean, that makes plenty of sense.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Since we have time, we don't have other topics. Just to flesh it out more, to save time for like someone sent it and then we switch later. Right now we have a bunch of different specifications that are all independently versioned. Any suggestions? So I feel like this should maybe just be at the top level because like they could all reference the same document.
Yes, that's kind of like your specification life cycle kind of thing, and you define that once and for all. And I mean, if we feel like we need to change it at some point, probably you should change it across the board. Yes. So I think it is a top level kind of thing.
Okay.
But it is orthogonal to the versions, right? I mean,
yeah. Each version would effectively have one of these.
Exactly.
Any thoughts on URL? Like salsa.dev/ common/maturity or something?
When you get into URLs policies and it's like it becomes a bit religious territory in my experience. People feel strongly one way or another. I was raised with the W3C where URLs. What's important is they never change, and they don't necessarily should have built into them anything that has to do with the status of the document, which can change. And so it's a little bit up to you. Do you want to tackle that part? You can put like WD to make working draft, into the URL. Either at the
Oh,
end
sorry,
or
I meant like
Okay.
where do we, that's actually a separate question. That's a good question. I meant like where the definition of these
For the
terms.
We call it like the specification lifecycle or something like that. Specification status.
Yeah, I think a separate question is like, in the URL, should you indicate that it's a draft or not?
Yes, that's what I thought you were asking. Sorry.
I see, yeah. Include status in URL. So one thing I did in the Provenance 1.0 pull request was I added a query parameter for that. Because in the past we've added it like a separate page, but that's just a pain. It's a pain for that to set up redirects to the new one. What we could do is just have a query parameter that just gets ignored, but just is a form of documentation. Because it kind of would be useful to note, like when you link to like spec 1.0, that whoever linked to it was linking to a draft at the time. You could have like JavaScript that just appends the question mark draft or whatever. Or am I overthinking? Is that over engineering?
I'm honestly, I'm trying not to bring in all the baggage that I have with Direct3C, which has a fairly complex model with URLs that always point to the letters, and each new specification version has its own URL, but it always points to letters, and you can always see it. You can they have the whole chain. You can walk through all the different versions of drafts they had and stuff. I don't necessarily want to reproduce all of this. There is some, good aspect to it, but I think I'm trying, I would favor trying to keep it simple and only add additional mechanisms if we feel really the need for them.
I somewhat like the idea of having a parameter that indicates you're opting into viewing this preview, kind of like previewing something in a content management system or something, so that if people are sharing the URL around, there's additional context in there. But I haven't thought about this long and hard like someone who's scarred by W3C processes. So.
Yeah, I think if we had like an official release process where we tag each one, or either a nightly build or a tag, ideally we would have a permanent URL that is that specific version, and then like a latest thing that is floating. But we don't have that right now. I'm not sure it's worth the trouble of.
So I will add another piece on that, because if you look at the HTML spec, for instance, right? I mean, Direct3C used to be a strong believer in providing stable versions that you could point to, and clearly the jury, has concluded that no, this doesn't matter. What the industry now is settling on what's called living standards, right? Because if there is a bug you find, you're going to fix it, and you want everybody to use the fixed version. So the value of pointing to old version doesn't really, it isn't very high. I mean, for archaeologists, maybe it is kind of neat, but what really matters is to be able to point to the latest version and have people use that as much as possible.
Yeah, okay, so that's basically, I kind of come to that conclusion on my own as well. Okay, so it's good, it's useful to know that other orgs are doing that. Maybe as like a side project, and if anyone or myself, like we could add like we could document the convention of like using question mark draft or working draft or something like that, just to indicate of like, if you're linking to that, you're really like, you know that this is completely unstable, versus once we have something, we're guaranteeing it's mostly stable. We might have bug fixes and clarifications, but it's mostly, it's effectively like a branch. But like the early draft, you know, all bets are off. I'm not making any guarantees that when you look at it again tomorrow, it's going to look anything like this.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw in the chat, some people, they suggested maturity level, which sounds good too.
Although Joshua said maybe avoid the term level because we already have salsa level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want
Too
people to
many
think that's your
levels.
salsa maturity level. Exactly. Fewer levels is better.
Maturity stages, I don't know. We can
What's
come
that?
up with a whole bunch of names.
Is it worth also noting the status of like outdated, where there's like there exists a newer version? So like if you're looking at 0.1 and 1.0 is out, that might be valuable in the same spot of like it's a spec, but there exists a newer version.
Yeah, I wouldn't bother for the drafts, but for the actual specs, yes, the released version, I think it is useful to do that. And W3C added that after quite a few years, but now if you go to an old version of HTML, it will say this is obsolete and it's been superseded by, and it provides you a pointer to the newer version. I think that is useful.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Brandon, I agree, but ultimately we have to choose something, so it's easier just to have a 10-minute conversation now than to like one person pick something and then go back and forth and review comments. Okay, that sounds good. I will create well, do you want to create an issue? Do you want me to create an issue? Just to keep track of this.
For the maturity stages, status. I
Yeah.
can create the issue if you want, that's fine.
Great, that's perfect. I'll put action item.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, I don't know how to do it. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Sure.
Any other topics? Okay, sounds good. I think then we could end early. As always, we can continue discussion on the issues. So good seeing everyone. Talk to you next week.